So your book is called The Leadership Pause, which I love that. What does it really mean to pause as a leader?
Hmm.
And why is this practice more important than ever in today's world?
Well, that's a great $60,000, maybe $100,000 question these days, right? I write in my book that I wrote the book because I needed to read it. I'm
Mm,
like a lot of folks out there who are pretty ambitious, pretty driven. And I wrote the pause because I kept seeing the consequences of not pausing. That people would rush headlong into something and then have a lot of reactivity, or they would, based on their life circumstances and how they are shaped emotionally and mentally, they would pull back. And so not fully entering any kind of conversation. And so what would happen is lots and lots of non thinking, a lot of reactivity. So to pause, and there's lots of kinds of pauses, and I talk about those throughout the book, but to pause is to really interrupt an automatic habit, whether
mm,
that's a habit in behavior, a habit of mind, an emotional habit, like you and I are friends and you always do this and I always react that way. That's a habit.
yeah, yeah.
And that happens with bosses and colleagues. And so, and of course, family. So just pausing so we can interrupt that.
Hello, my extraordinary women friends. Have you ever felt the world moving so fast that the only way forward was to stop and breathe? In this week's episode of Extraordinary Women Radio, I am joined by Dr. Chris Johnson, founder of Q4 Consulting and the Core Presence Institute, master somatic coach, and author of The Leadership Pause. Chris brings over 3 decades of experience helping leaders access their inner wisdom, lead with presence, and navigate uncertainty with grace and groundedness. This is a conversation about reclaiming your power, not through force, but through embodiment. We talk about the role of the nervous system in leadership, why reactivity and resilience go hand in hand, and how learning to pause can unlock new levels of clarity, confidence, and creativity. And if this episode speaks to you, I invite you to explore my upcoming Equine Vision Journey retreat this July. It's designed to help women entrepreneurs slow down, reconnect with their bodies, and access powerful new visions for their lives and businesses in partnership with horses and nature. You can learn more at CamiGellner.com. Just look for my events section and you'll find information on the retreat. Today, Chris and I even talk a bit about the wisdom of horses in this episode, so you're going to love this one. Let's dive in and let's meet Dr. Chris Johnson. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Chris. I am so
Mhm.
excited to have you here today.
Well, I am happy to be here, Cami. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You and I have gotten to know each other over the last year or more, and
Mhm.
I think our work is so aligned. And we've just got this, there's just so many threads that interconnect between our work, and
Yeah.
we're always going, oh, yes, that.
And that.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's start with your story. Let's start with your story and how you got to doing the work that you're doing today.
Hmm. Well, there's probably a really long version that I won't take you through, but the short version is that my background is as a clinical psychologist in the trauma space, and it just happens that it was about 20 years ago. Just around then, that I had some personal trauma and was doing some pivoting relationship wise and work wise. And so I had to see if I could apply all the things I was ostensibly helping my clients with to myself. And that's really when the coaching process took over. So I
Mm.
moved and did a lot more from clinical to coaching. And
I didn't know that. I don't think I knew that, or
you
I
did,
forgot it if I did know
ah,
it.
yeah, yeah. That's how it started. And years ago, my both my parents were entrepreneurs, and so I
Mhm.
kind of was really have always been interested in working with people where they work and live.
Mhm.
And so, due to some trauma in my sister's life, I took a dog leg and went the trauma route for a number of years, which was serviceable because there's a lot of trauma out there. And then when I went through my own stuff, it was like, I really need to make a pivot and I'd like to work with more people at work. And that's when I started working with more
So you were working
leaders.
with people individually to start with,
Hmm.
and then you
Hmm.
made that shift to working with people in work.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I'd done it kind of off and on. And so what was really interesting is I was seeing a lot of people coming into my clinical practice,
Hmm.
couples, individuals, some families. And then I kept hearing the strains of the trauma that was happening at work or the
Yes.
difficult communications happening at work. And then, oh my gosh, I have all these like stress symptoms, which are also trauma
Yeah.
symptoms, only they're on steroids. So
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
It's interesting because I never, when I was in the corporate world, I never thought of it through the lens of trauma.
Uh-huh.
After I left
Yeah. A
and I
different story.
decompressed, and then I was like, that was trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
I totally,
Yeah.
was able to connect those dots and really realize what that, what that felt like. So,
Yeah.
so important the work that you're doing in
Yeah.
organizations and, really helping shift that
Mhm.
what's happening.
Yeah. I think so, and it used to be I have to tell this fun little fact. So when I went to graduate school the first time with my master's degree,
Hmm.
I was interested in trauma kind of theoretically, and the research at the time was that there was 1 out of like 50,000 women would have been affected by some sort of sexual abuse. And of course, patently that was wrong and
Yeah.
false, and
Yeah. One
records
out of
hadn't been.
50,000. You're like, you can go into
No.
a room of women and half the room will raise their hand.
That's exactly right. And that was true then, but it's kind of like come out of its own closet over time. And maybe the pendulum swung a little bit different, like everybody's got a trauma, which is, living life is arduous, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think we're kind of now like in a place of a little bit more middling. And yeah, there's big T trauma and there's little t trauma. And we have it a lot at work and in our daily lives, the little
Hmm.
t for sure.
Yeah. So tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about how you work in organizations with trauma.
Yeah. I don't necessarily lead with it as
Yeah.
trauma,
Yeah.
but if you think about how trauma can disconnect us from ourselves, how trauma is stress on steroids, where people are reacting a lot. So when I get called in, it's usually to work with the leader and his or her team.
Hmm.
And then, so I'll do an assessment of sorts, and there's a
Hmm.
variety of tools that I use. Based on that, then we'll kind of break down like this is what I would recommend, and this is why, and this is what you can anticipate if we work this way. So, whether it's with your team or a couple of individual leaders. And then we start to look more broadly at the culture because very often, how they say, my Aikido sensei used to say this all the time, fish stink from the head down. So if things are not working well with the leaders, then it's going to disseminate through the organization. And there's a truth in that, right?
Right.
So then we start to get an eye view of like what's actually happening
But
in
you
the
generally
organization.
start with the individual
Mhm.
executive and then work through the organization.
Generally so, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Um, so let's talk a little bit more about what happens when you're working
Mhm.
with executive teams and, just a
Mhm.
conscious business. It's a different way of looking at businesses through a conscious lens.
Yeah.
What have you seen shift when leaders begin to prioritize like that pause, that presence, that deeper awareness, the work that you teach?
Mm-hmm. Well, all of that work is under like the rubric of self awareness
Hmm.
and kind of like listening. Most of us think we're good listeners. Most of us think we're pretty aware. And in fact, it's like, well, there's a lot of room there for growth and opportunity and ongoing awareness. So it has something to do with just showing up, being present, then being able to speak the truth from and not get all in a twist around can I actually speak truth? Do I have to hide parts of myself? So there's a whole authenticity piece around being with people. So, but when I get called in, generally there's some sort of conflict.
Hmm.
Somebody is at odds with somebody else, or members of this team are not working and playing well with another team.
Hmm.
And so doing some initial kind of emotional regulation practices to get them to appreciate that, yes, they are in fact reacting.
Yeah.
And then how does it show up and manifest in their behavior, in their conversations, and certainly in how they're able to lead. So regulating themselves first, co-regulating together, and then like how do we shift our conversations?
Cool. Very cool. So when you talk about regulate, what does that mean?
Yeah, regulating our nervous system is what I mean. So, Dr. Dan Siegel, who I quote a lot in my book, uh, he writes a lot around kids and families, but he's also moved into corporate. But he has a great quote that the best gift a parent can give their children is a well regulated nervous system.
Yeah.
And I would say the best thing a leader can do is set the stage for well-regulated nervous system amongst all team members. So we all have to have and develop to do life well, a regulation of our nervous system. When we're freaked out, we need to come back home. So when people are too stressed, we get anxiety and hypervigilance and that sort of thing. If I have a trauma background, that might be heightened. If that goes on too long, or my predisposition kind of in my personality or my shaping is such
Right.
that I tend more to be depressed, then I might see numbing or disconnecting or dissociation, right? So what we want to do is kind of stay in the mid range. That's what I mean by regulating. And we can do it individually, we need to, but it's really cool to do it together
Oh,
because
interesting.
yeah, because we know, like, if you and I are both jazzed about something or agitated, but we sat together over coffee and we started talking about, like, hey, this is what's really important to me, and you said this is what's important to you. Pretty soon, our nervous systems regulate together,
Right.
they co
Right.
regulate. So that's what I like to teach people.
That's really cool. And that's what that's reminding me of is the horse work that I do, right?
Oh, yeah, for
Right, because
sure.
that's
Hmm.
exactly what happens with
Yeah,
us is we start to really, and what was the word you used? The co-regulate? Is that
co
the word?
regulate. Hmm.
Yeah, so the when you're with a horse and you're doing like when I'm doing the equine guided coaching with my clients, what
Yeah,
happens is the horse and the client, they start to co-regulate together. So they start to
yeah.
find themselves in that same energy
Hmm.
together. They start to slow
Yes,
down together. They start to breathe together.
that's right.
their hearts even start to
Beat
there's research with
together.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm,
So it's really fascinating. And,
mhm.
and you think about how that can impact a team,
Oh,
as you're working with
yeah.
them and helping them co-regulate together, the outcomes have got to be just tremendous of what happens
Mhm,
when it comes to, just the shift of energy that can happen.
mhm. If people allow it.
Right.
But here's the real rub. Like, horses are amazing because they're just these big, beautiful, amazing creatures.
Hmm.
We're pretty amazing, but we're in some ways a lot more fragile
That's
than
very
horses,
true.
right? Like mentally and emotionally, we're a lot more fragile because we have much more attached to this ego idea. So part of what happens on teams is that people get really entrenched, and I've been there myself, so I know what that feels like,
Hmm.
with being attached to certain ideas or how things ought to go, or we need to follow regulations despite maybe the ultimate goal. And so sussing out and helping people handle intense emotion
Hmm.
and come out on the other side of that in terms of conflict and being able to listen to each other, I think is the work of our time.
Yeah.
I think it's really the work of our time, and it requires a lot of me to be able to hold that space. But it's quite beautiful when it can happen,
Hmm.
and a lot of it has to do with the physiological regulation, like with the horses, but also our capacity to ask the right kind of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense
Mhm.
because to be able to help people drop into what's actually going on for them is a
Yes,
skill set in itself, right?
it
Because
is
people
totally.
often can't name that they're not even tuned
Yes,
in or aware,
that's right.
and so helping them discover that, and
Yeah,
it opens up a whole new world.
it does totally.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So your book is called The Leadership Pause, which I
Yeah.
love that. What
Hmm.
does it really mean to pause as a leader? And
Hmm.
why is this practice more important than ever in today's world?
Well, that's a great $60,000, maybe $100,000 question these days, right?
Right.
um, I write in my book that I wrote the book because I needed to read it. I'm
Mm,
like a lot of folks out there who are pretty ambitious,
mhm,
pretty driven,
mhm.
and I wrote the pause because I kept seeing the consequences of not pausing,
Yeah.
that people would rush headlong into something and then have a lot of reactivity, or they would based on their life circumstances and how they are shaped emotionally and mentally, they would pull back.
Mhm.
And so not fully entering any kind of conversation. And so what would happen is lots and lots of non-thinking, a lot of reactivity. So to pause, and there's lots of kinds of pauses, and I talk about those throughout the book, but to pause is to really interrupt an automatic habit, whether that's a
Mm.
habit in behavior, a habit of mind, an emotional habit. Like you and I are friends and you always do this and I always react that way. That's a habit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and that happens with bosses and colleagues. And so, and of course, family. So just pausing so we can interrupt that.
that's awesome. Because I
And
was thinking of pause through a different lens. I was just thinking of
ah,
the slow down, pause, breathe,
uh-huh.
that sort of thing. But this
Yeah.
is much deeper. It's like really recognizing
Yeah.
what's happening. What are those things that we would just automatically do without thinking about and interrupting
Yes.
those patterns.
That's right. So it could be in the moment. So I define pause in the book, like I just said, it's an interruption. So
Mhm.
it could be a momentary pause, like we're having here,
Right.
just to think. It
Yeah.
could be, I'm going to pause for an afternoon
Yep.
because I need to get my head clear. It could be a weekend. It could be, I'm going to go on sabbatical.
Yeah.
So there's lots of kinds of pauses, and the elements are mental, heart, and your whole body and your capacity to take action. We would
Yeah.
call it somatics, you and me, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
totally. So
Yeah.
the pause is where we're breaking a pattern,
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
would think that that's probably one of those ones that's really important right now. I mean, obviously, we all
I
need to
think
pause
so.
for all the other kinds of pauses as well, but
Yeah.
I know that I fall into
Mhm.
patterns with
Mhm.
specific people, with
Mhm.
specific circumstances
Yeah.
that being more aware of that would
Mhm.
would serve me.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And I
Awesome.
would say it would serve you because, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, I would propose that our capacity to pause is the differentiator for how effective we're going to be as leaders, especially into the future, because
Mhm.
I think it's tied to our capacity to access power. If I
Mm.
do not have control over my attention, or my emotions, if I don't have a grip on all that, I'm going to be much more reactive to what somebody says to me, etc. Reactive as in not regulated.
Yeah.
And so, but the more I can be present, then there's a deep well of power, like power in connecting with our core values, power in getting energized by what excites us with
Yeah.
those core values. Yeah,
Yeah.
all of that.
I like that a lot. And I think, right, well, just one thing that's popping up for me is right now I'm in the midst of doing 111 days of this course on Insight Timer, and it's about presence.
Oh,
And it's all
mhm.
about presence. And it's just
Yeah.
so easy. And it's 5 minutes every morning. And
Uh-huh.
it's so fascinating to me how quickly
Yeah.
my mind can go somewhere else,
Else?
and
Isn't it
not.
amazing? It's
Yeah.
so amazing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it is, and
Yeah.
and I think I'm probably about 20, 25, 27 days in at this point,
Uh-huh.
and and it's really been, and it's given me some really interesting tools
Mhm.
to like just notice what's going on in my mind, and how
Yeah.
to like really just let that settle.
Yes.
So it's been really fun
Yes.
to play with this, but I think in the mix, and kind of going back to what you were talking about being leaders, we
Mhm.
lead people through. I mean, I lead my clients, I lead my community.
Mhm.
You do the same thing, and it's
Right.
and especially in this day and age where there's so much noise around us,
Yes.
that
So much.
we can get caught up into
Mhm.
all the things so easily.
Absolutely.
And I have to really make sure that I don't go down this the frenzy of what's
Mhm.
around us in the
Mhm.
world,
Yeah.
and really ground myself back into, okay, what is my role? What's the impact that I'm here to make?
Right.
What's my why? And the
Mhm.
more I can do that, the more
Yes.
I feel like I can,
Mhm.
show up as
Mhm.
as in my best way versus into a
Sure.
frenzied mindset first.
Absolutely. I think knowing what our why is, what our purpose is,
Mhm.
knowing our core values and the the outcome that we would like to be a part of contributing to.
Mhm.
And many, it's amazing how many leaders are not aware of that. So they're leading organizations and they're just kind of clueless about how it connects to them personally, as if a business is a separate entity. It's really
Mhm.
kind of an extension of who we are as
Yeah.
leaders, in my
Yeah.
opinion, from a conscious perspective.
Yeah.
Um, so all those things are really key. And even then it's hard because the algorithms of all the technology today are really like, let's suck you into our little world
Yeah.
and get you going, right? So it takes some intention for sure, which
Yeah.
is why the pause is so necessary. And actually, I don't know if this is true. I am really interested in this notion of how all this connects with power, but I'm
Mhm.
also been thinking about doing some writing around what are the reflective practices of leaders who really take their work in the world seriously?
Mm, that is interesting. Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
very interesting. And I
Yeah.
do think that when you're present, you're more embodied, you're more
Mhm.
that's where the power comes from, is that embodiment, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about embodiment and
Yeah.
somatics, because I know this is something that always jazzes both of us.
I know, we get very excited.
What,
Mm.
why is embodiment such an essential leadership skill, and
Hmm.
how does it shift the way we look at our businesses and how we approach life in general?
Yeah. Um, I didn't used to know anything about this notion of being embodied.
Yeah, me either.
And so I was at a really low point
Mhm.
back, like I mentioned, when I took a pivot and started to turn. It wasn't long after that period of time that I went to study embodiment, leadership embodiment,
Mhm.
embodied leadership.
Right.
And, the
And
reality
you
is
you
all,
studied at the Strozzi Institute,
yeah,
and I studied with
mhm,
Ariana Strozzi.
yes.
So that's where we find that loop back to each other for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, for sure. Well, and I studied with Wendy Palmer, who was also married to Richard Strozzi
Hmm.
before, and I
Hmm.
studied with Jeannie Whitelaw at the Institute for Zen Leadership. So a lot of practice in this space. And what I've come to know is that all of us are shaped early in life by all kinds of forces, our family, the environment, community we grew up in, all of that shapes us. And most of it's out of our conscious awareness. Maybe the head part, we go to school and we learn certain things. But all of us are already embodied in something. We're always practicing something. The question is, what are we practicing and are we aware of it? So, what I learned back then when I took that dog leg and was really in a pretty broken, might be too hard, but I was pretty not in great shape.
Hmm.
Um, that's when it's like, oh my gosh, we can learn through the body. So
Yeah.
instead of just having like this vehicle that gets me from one place to the other, or being attached to some beauty around or not around the perception of a body, it was like, no, there's aliveness that happens within. And so, this whole notion of embodied learning, that there's actually a shortcut for all of us, especially as leaders, that when we tune into the aliveness of the body, we have more access to resources, the
Hmm.
kind of natural resources that we come out of the box with, I like to say, God given. Like
Hmm.
there's energy, there's aliveness, there's like a lot of juice just by being alive, right?
Right.
And we
Right.
have access to that and it can form our heart and then we can make good decisions. But the way we're educated, we tend to think of it head, maybe heart. We don't even include the body. So
Yeah.
it's a whole different way of learning, and it's changed my life. How about
Yeah.
you? Yeah, it
Yeah, it
changed your.
definitely changed my life because in the
Uh-huh.
corporate world, I was just that was being embodied was not part
Yeah,
of who I
thing.
was, right? I mean, it
Hmm.
was just like I was always in my head,
Yeah.
and it was so Ariana Strozzi did all the
Hmm.
equine guided education, so
Yeah.
that was the work where I started to really
Hmm.
discover it. And what's beautiful about the horses is the horses will engage with us or not engage with us if
Hmm.
we're embodied or not embodied, right? And so
That's right.
they
Hmm.
can they that mirror to us was just so fantastic. And
Yeah.
I think there was things that was had gone on in my life, the healing from leaving the corporate world. I'd lost my father, so there was all
Hmm.
sorts of healing that I was going through.
Hmm.
And it was such a way to start to actually feel what
Yeah.
was in my body, which I just didn't have that concept before then.
Hmm.
And, today I coach deeply attached to my,
Yeah.
my awareness of what's happening in my body. I mean, I can
Absolutely.
be, coaching somebody, and I'm like, what's going on in your, your stomach, or,
Mhm.
because I will feel these things,
In
um,
yourself, right?
in,
So
in
that you
myself, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And and so it's like it's really fascinating to be able
Yeah.
to tune into another being
Uh-huh.
with that alignment, and being able to feel within your body. Or I mean, and just, on the other side of it is like, you
Mm.
know just, I teach visibility always. I mean, that's, being visible, being,
Yeah.
getting on stages.
Mhm.
And that was my own journey, was, and that's part of the reason I teach it, right, is because I
Mhm.
had to learn how to really become embodied
Mhm.
in my messaging, in my, when I
Yeah.
walk on the stage, and just be me versus
Mhm.
try to project something.
Yeah. That's
And
absolutely right.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of my own lessons that I found along the way
Mhm.
that opened up a whole new world for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you know this, if I've shared this, Cami, but when I actually did go and study at Strozzi Institute, Ariana was still there. And
Okay.
one of my most profound experiences was with her on the horses, and the
Oh,
horse named Jetstar, who was amazing and totally. I mean, I went and wrote a bunch about it because, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And it was mind blowing at the time. And still, I remember it as a key moment, like a threshold moment in my life, for like,
yeah.
oh, okay, this is the work I'm called into. And a lot of it for me, interesting, you're talking about visibility. A lot of it for me has to do with being empowered and
Hmm.
claiming it and owning it, which is what so many of us struggle with, especially women. Like
Yeah.
just owning the fact that we're kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And, like just do it, do you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Totally. I no, I don't think I did know that. And I,
Oh, yeah.
and I think what's beautiful about that is when we learn through somatics or being embodied,
Hmm.
it does become really memorable. It becomes
Oh,
ingrained in our being, that we
absolutely.
carry that forward. And that's, I think, is so
Yeah,
powerful. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great that we share that. I
I
love that.
know,
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. So you've said that our power is as close as our next breath. How does that belief influence the way that you help leaders access their clarity, their presence, their purpose?
Hmm.
I think it's, it's another aspect of this. It's like we have,
Yeah.
we tune into our bodies, but the breath is another part of this.
The breath is when we inhale, we are inspired,
Hmm.
quite literally on a biological level,
Hmm.
and then we can extend that naturally to the world. So we're inspiring to others.
Hmm.
And the world in which we live, we tend to separate out the mind, the heart, the body, even as I was just describing it, but it's really all one.
Right.
So the quickest, shortest way to become present is to tune into the sensations. And the easiest way to do that is the breath.
Yeah.
And so we share this natural co regulating possibility vis a vis the breath.
Hmm.
And simply just having leaders slow down long enough to attune to their breath. So sometimes I'll have them hold their breath just to kind of see what
Just,
happens,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and you can't do that very long. Or then I'll have them breathe different kinds of breath patterns. And we know breath workers out there teach us all the time, like there are different cadences of breathing that facilitate different kinds of energy.
Right.
And it's so universal. We're much more connected on all the levels than we think not. So I think I lost sight of your question there, but
But it's
teaching
with the
or
breath, right? I mean,
yeah, it's with
it's
the
tapping
breath.
back into the breath. It's just like tapping
Yeah.
into our bodies and tapping
Yeah.
into our breath.
Hmm.
And, we both talked about how at one point we were disconnected from ourselves. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
as leaders, what practices can help us return to center? And so we've talked about breath.
Yeah.
What else can help us get back to that centered place?
That's a really great question. So when you and I are talking about center, my guess is that we're similarly sharing like the center of our bodies is a couple inches below our belly button and kind
Totally.
of a couple inches in. But it's not just a physical space, it's an organizing principle of being like, I imagine I'll talk about it sometimes in my meditation classes that I
Hmm.
teach too, is
Hmm.
it's like little bits of me are all over like confetti. And so I want to collect all of them right
Yep.
here at my center
Hmm.
because that's where the power lay.
Yeah.
Um, and because I also have an Aikido practice, I don't know if you practice Aikido or
I
not, but
don't, but I
yeah,
think it would be fascinating
it
because
is
it's like that
fascinating.
grounding piece, right? Like such a grounding element to
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Well, O Sensei, who was the kind of founder of Aikido, who's a little Japanese man, about 5 foot tall.
Hmm.
And at one point he said, you cannot overcome me because I am connected and one with the universe. I mean, he
Mm.
made that kind of declaration.
Yeah.
And he was talking about accessing his energy at the center and being able to move people literally across a room, not by force, but by the power of his presence.
Yeah.
And so when we think about leaders, so certainly a breath practice, sometimes I have a very focused recalibration.
Hmm.
I call it pause, center, focus. It's
Hmm.
like a 3 breath practice. We also know that if you are intentional about it and you're jazzed up a little bit with stress, you do 30 to 60 seconds of deep breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Those stress chemicals, especially cortisol, will dissipate. Your head will clear,
Yeah.
etc. So those kinds of practices, there's lots of presencing practices, but those are the ones that I tend to have them do. And then some kind of writing or reflection
Nice.
practice.
Nice. So do
Yeah.
you call it in a keto, do you call it the dantian? Is that the area that, that core area just below the belly button? Do you call it that? Is
We,
that
we, we call it center. It is a dantian, but that's in a different tradition. We just
okay?
talk about ki right there at the
Okay.
center, at your hara, Hara, the hara. So if we can access hara power, which is a Japanese word, I guess, for center, that's
Hmm.
really what we want. So it's that
Yeah.
integrating all along that
Yeah.
vertical line.
I trained with another person I did some work with is Rachel Jane Groover in
Mm,
her Art
mm.
of Feminine Presence, and she calls it the womb space.
The
Yeah.
womb space.
Right.
Okay. Mm,
And
nice.
so that grounding in that space is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. I mean, it's like before I walk onto a stage, I'm feeling for that space. I'm like
Yeah.
I'm like dropping into that space.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And if there's something that's big and I'm kind of, you know, I'm worried about something, it's like that's a way that I ground in.
Yeah.
Definitely, I consciously drop into my body in that
Uh-huh.
space. So.
Well, because it's super palpable, right? I mean, it's really hard to kind of describe beyond the
Mhm.
womb space or the center, the hara. Like, what is it? You kind of don't know it until you drop in and you can feel it.
Feel it, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and then you can let your light shine from that, and that's
Yeah,
part of
yeah.
what we teach in my speaker
Mm-hmm.
training that we do is like
Mm-hmm.
we drop there, and then
Yeah.
okay, now let your light shine, let those wings form behind you, that sort of
Uh-huh.
thing.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
cool, 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 cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for somebody who's listening and feeling right now that in this world that we live in, they're feeling maybe burnout or reactive or overwhelmed.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
What's one small but powerful shift that she can start doing today?
Ooh, there are so many, but I think the biggest one right away um, would be to stand up and feel your feet on the floor and
Mhm.
then take a deep breath as if you're drawing breath in through the feet all the way up to the crown of your head.
Mm.
Because when we feel our feet, it takes anxiety down. It gives us access through the center to the life within. So even if you can't stand up, you could sit at your desk. Like I'm
Yeah.
sitting on a stool right now and I can feel my feet. And there's just a grounding. Like we're made of the earth. So we're just reconnecting with what we're made of,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I love it so much. Okay, so where can our listeners learn more about you, about your book,
Mm,
the leadership pause, and just anything else? Where can they find you and follow you?
yeah, yeah. So you can connect with me over on LinkedIn, Chris L. Johnson, and you'll find me and my little mug over there with my book. Actually, I'll show you the book. This is the Leadership Pause. So this is what it looks like.
Oh, yeah.
I also have a chapter in this book that just came out, Leading with Compassion, that came out this year. So
Yay!
LinkedIn,
Congratulations.
thank you. And you could connect with me on at Dr. Chris at q4-consulting.com. That's my email address. And my website is q4-consulting.com,
Cool.
where you
And
can
we'll put
learn more
those
about what
links.
I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll put those links into the show notes for everyone so you can tune into it. And your
Yeah.
books are best to buy on your website, on Amazon. What's
You can buy it. You can go to my website. There's a whole speaker or a book page rather,
uh-huh.
and it describes a little bit about the book. You can see some endorsements about it. You can read a little bit about why. And there's a link to buy on Amazon or Bookshelf or Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
Any of those are
Cool.
fine.
Good to
Yeah.
have choices.
Yeah, it's
Good
good
to
to have
have choices.
choices. Yeah,
I
for
like it.
sure.
Okay. The final question I always close with are what are three pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
Ooh, pearls, Cami. You didn't tell me this was happening. Pearls of wisdom. Hmm. Pause is your friend always.
Mm,
Mhm. Be willing to go first in any situation. Be willing to go first. So presencing to get there, to go first. Um, and I would say when you're in a twist, when I'm in a twist, this goes back to my grandmother, but like walk it off.
mm,
There's a way that movement is really, really smart to help us recalibrate, re regulate our nervous system, get
mhm.
that clarity, and then we can move into action. If we don't walk it off, it stays up here and gets all jammed up. So that's not what we want.
Oh, I love that so much. I so love it. Chris, this was fun. I
This
learned
was
some new things about you, and it was just a great
cool.
conversation. So
Thank you.
thanks for joining me today. And I know our audience is going to love it. And thank you for
Mm.
everything.
Thank you, Cami. It's a pleasure to be here.
You
Take
bet.
care. Bye.